Let's face it, we all have issues. Issues can become problems, and problems without proper resolution can result into something greater. In this case, mental illness. This program attempts to not only acknowledge our state of mental health, but start the conversation on the road to solutions. There's a saying, I'd rather be sick and know it than not know it and show it. In order to fix the problem has to be acknowledged and understood. In our state of mental health, we definitely see something is wrong. Many of us cannot see it or will not see it or even ignore the problems. In this episode, it is what it is. Our conversation is with Dr. John Queener, professor in the Department of Counseling at the University of Akron and psychologist with the Minority Behavioral Health Group in Akron, Ohio. We will discuss what the current state of mental health looks like in our communities and how to change our perceptions. Please join us. All right. Well, Dr. Queener, thank you for your time. So hopefully we're gonna get some good stuff out of the question. As I told you before, I'm naturally curious, so I just want some answers. So as we start, I want to know, do you think that this video series is necessary? I mean, in your professional opinion, how colossal is the issue of mental illness or mental health in the Black community?
I think the issue is really important. As you probably may know, there's a stigma against mental health in some parts of the African American community. Even I grew up with the expression that what goes on in this family stays in this family. And a lot of times, people won't seek out mental health services because that message has been given to them. So they don't talk about the issues, they don't talk about depression, they don't talk about anxiety, they don't talk about the things that can affect them psychologically.
So what goes on in this family stays on this family. So we're not even, do you think we're just prone in the Black community to not seeking help?
Yes, that's one of the things that we pass down from generation to generation. So a series like this can go a long way in removing the stigma that we have towards seeking mental health.
So that's one reason that maybe it's a fear of embarrassment that keeps us from getting help. What do you think another reason that we don't go out and get the help that we need in the Black community? Is it other stigma?
There's other stigma, like we believe that if you seek out mental health services, you're weak or you're crazy, you're talking to yourself, you're hallucinating. So a lot of times we believe that mental health isn't for us because we're, quote, are not crazy.
Right. So what if you don't know that you have an issue? What are the indicators that it's time to seek help?
Yes, what I tell people is always looking at what the outcome is. If things are not going well with your relationships, if you are not having success in your job or in your community or in your interpersonal interactions, then that suggests that there may be a problem. And so what I always emphasize when I'm doing workshops and presentations is that it's better if you come in before you fall, so we don't have to pick you up. So if you come in and get some help before things get too bad, then it's more likely to have some successful outcome.
So in your work, and you've been doing it a while, how often have you seen people fall? I mean, people that just let it get too far and now it's out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, even in Ohio, we have more African Americans being what we call pink slip, involuntary hospitalized, meaning that some entity outside of themselves say you have to go in and receive inpatient treatment. And we're more likely to receive that than any other group. And one of the reasons why we receive that at a higher rate is because we wait till things get so bad before we actually have to seek treatment.
Right. Now, I recently read an article, and I think this ties into the same thing. It was an article that was called Depression or the Blues. Mm-hmm. How do you differentiate? How do you know that Tanya has a problem versus she's just having a series of bad days because the bills aren't getting paid? How do you know when this is actually a problem?
Well, for me, if she's having a series of bad days, that's a problem.
Okay.
And so I would want her to come in and get help. So for instance, if we get her before she actually get what we call clinical depression or major depression, then she's more likely to come out of that blues at a lot earlier state and feeling better about herself. If we wait till she gets depression, full-blown major depression, then treatment takes a lot longer. Then she may need some medication as well. And so things become more complex the longer you wait to deal with the blues before it becomes a depression.
Right. Do you see higher trends in African American men or African American women?
Definitely more African American women are more likely to seek mental health treatment than African American men. That's the same thing with medical treatment. More women are more likely to seek out treatment than are black men.
Why is that?
It's twofold, I think. I believe one is the services aren't directed for black men. I think we're more successful at bringing that more black people in general because we targeted culturally specific ways to reach black folk. Then I think the other reason is that black men are socialized that they can do it themselves, and that if they need help, that means that they're weak, that means that they can't handle things. And so a lot of us get that machismo thing going where we won't seek out help.
Right, right, right. This may be a big question, but I'm gonna go ahead and shoot it out there anyway. Do you think that a lot of post-slavery has carried over and has affected our mental state?
Oh, without a doubt. There's a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. I don't know if you read that or not. But the author of that book talks about what would happen if people receive trauma or witness trauma for 245 years.
Right.
And then they don't receive any treatment for seeing that trauma. She argues that a lot of them will end up passing that trauma on from one generation to the next.
Right, 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 right. Wow. So my next question is, and I've been thinking about this a lot, are all forms of mental illness diagnosable? And what I mean is, do things like a negative mindset or an attitude of poverty or the need to overspend or racial hatred even, do those things fall under the umbrella of mental illness?
Those probably wouldn't fall under the category of a diagnosable mental illness. In psychology, we have a book called the DSM-5, and that is sort of the book that we look at symptoms and then we categorize those symptoms to a particular depression or to a particular mental health issue. For instance, depression is not just feeling blue. There's a whole list of symptoms that people have to experience for a period of time before it becomes major depression. But what I would argue is that we experience issues in our community that may not be diagnosable, but are still harmful, and that we can benefit by receiving some mental health counseling or attending mental health workshops so we can deal with those issues again before we fall. So we can catch each other while we're slipping, we can help, we don't have to pick each other up.
Right, right, right. So would you say that, and this is another big one, that race still an issue in America?
Yes, race is a major issue in America. And I kind of chuckle because I can't believe some people try to say that it's not an issue. Since the beginning of this country, race is an issue. And because we have not dealt with it on a serious level, it still continues to be an issue even today. In fact, some will argue that it's worse today because it's more insidious. And so you don't have the overt people hanging from the tree or the signs that say separate bathrooms, but yet we still have problems in our educational system, in our mental health system, in our medical system, in our banking system that creates disparities between African Americans and whites.
Right. So with that being said, how would you say that that still being an issue is affecting the overall state of mental health in the black community?
Right, and so what we will argue is, in the field of psychology, is that racism is a type of stressor that has a negative impact on you psychologically and also on you physically. And so if we don't deal with racism, then the stress from racism creates problems for us psychologically as well as medically.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so I did a little bit of research about you, Dr. Queener, trying to get prepared, and I was looking at a couple of studies just in preparation for this, and I saw on mentalhealthamerica.net it was reported that people of color account for about 60% of the prison population. And I saw that in 2014 you were a part of you did a presentation that was related to the likelihood of black male imprisonment. You talked on those lines. Do you think that that percentage and the amount of us going to prison, does that have anything to do with mental illness?
Well, we know overall, in general, a significant number of people who are in prison have mental health issues. So we know that in general. So that will be a part of what you will see in terms of the disproportionate number, especially black men who are in prison. But we also know our drug laws have had a significant impact on the number of black men who have been in prison as well. And so many have argued, when you look at the data, it hasn't been a war on drugs, it's been a war on black and brown men.
Right.
Because after those laws have been passed, we've seen a significant increase of black and brown men who are in prison. As you say, about 60% are in prison, even though we represent about 12% of the population.
Right. And even that war on, like you said, black and brown men, do you think that trickles down and has mental health effects on us? For one, from the men being taken out of the environment,
Exactly.
the women losing the men, the
Exactly.
children not having the father.
Exactly.
So it all is a contributor.
Exactly. Yes. You've done some good study.
Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of
No,
here!
seriously, because again, when you remove men from the community,
Yeah.
that then has, as you said, a trickle-down effect on the family, on the children, on the moms and sisters, and all. That affects all of us when you remove a significant portion
Right.
of black men from the community.
So what we're getting out of this is that there are many streams that are feeding that issue of mental illness. It's come from a
Exactly.
lot of places.
Exactly.
Okay. So many organizations provide psychological counseling to different communities under different philosophies. Now that's new to me. I just found that out. And you all counsel under
African-centered philosophy.
African-centered philosophy. What is that?
Well, first let me explain why we do it, then I'll tell you what it
Okay.
is. We believe that one of the reasons black folk don't go to counseling is because they don't think it'll meet its needs. And when we look at the literature, we find that black folk are actually right. For instance, there are about 4 pieces of literature that suggest that traditional theories are not good or don't lead to good outcomes for African Americans. First, we find that African Americans underutilized, meaning that even though we experience an exorbitant amount of stressors, we tend not to go in for mental health counseling because we believe it's not going to help us. Second thing is we find that even when we go, we prematurely terminate services, meaning we go one time, don't meet our needs,
Right.
and we don't go back. In comparison to our white counterparts who go one time, they develop a working alliance, and they stay in therapy. Then even if we stay in therapy, we find that we're more likely to receive a bias in treatment and a bias in diagnosis. So that suggests that even when we go and stay in therapy, we find things are still problematic for us in terms of outcome. And so what we here at Minority Behavioral Health decide to do is develop a system of psychotherapy that we believe is consistent with our culture, African American culture, which we believe is based on African culture. So what we've done is we've adopted a system of psychotherapy that has as its underlying philosophy ancient African philosophy. And it was actually developed by Linda James Myers out of Ohio State. And here are some of the things that are different from what we do than what is done in traditional mental health delivery systems. First, when we look at our clients, we believe that our clients believe in a higher spirit.
Right.
Again, dating back to ancient Africa. When you look at Western psychology, they don't believe in spirit because it's not something you can count. Right. And so therefore they tend to ignore spirituality. Not only that, we believe that not only is spirit important, we believe that African Americans and others are actually the physical manifestation of spirituality. So when the Creator decided to make a human being, He made you and me. So therefore, that means we have greater worth than just by being. When you look at Western psychology, they don't have anything called intrinsic worth. They have extrinsic worth, meaning that you have to have so much money, you have to have so much education, you have to live in certain neighborhoods in order to have worth. We believe just by being born from the Creator, you automatically have worth. In our tradition, we believe in what we call self-knowledge, and that is the belief of understanding who you are and understanding what your purpose is in life. In Western psychology, they don't talk about self-knowledge, they talk about what was called objective knowledge, and that's why there's the emphasis on testing and things that you're supposed to know outside of understanding who you are. Right. Another thing that differentiates what we do here versus what Western psychology does is that we look at what is called diunital logic versus dichotomous logic in Western psychology. Diunital logic says something can be good and bad. In Western psychology, it's the belief that something can be good or bad. And so we believe the context determines whether something is good or bad. And so that creates more cognitive flexibility in your thinking, which leads to more cognitive complexity in your decision making. We also look at what we call holistic analyses, meaning that in Western psychology, there's been an argument for centuries as to what determines behavior, behaviors or thoughts or feelings. In African-centered psychology, we believe all those things impact, and so therefore there's no need to argue over thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. You're supposed to look at all of them in terms of being a psychologist. And so we believe that looking at clients through belief systems analysis or optimal psychology, which automatically assigns worth to our clients, creates a different interaction than if you believe that you have to come from a certain space or a certain place in order to have worth. And so that's why we believe what we provide our clients is something very different than what they receive from traditional mental health delivery systems. And so one of the questions you asked me at the outset was about the stigma. And so a lot of our traditional mental health systems that don't use an African-centered perspective, they have problems retaining clients. They have problems getting clients coming through the door. Right. We always have a waiting list. So we believe that if you offer services through a culturally specific lens, then the people will come.
Right. So it seems like people aren't getting help because the help that they need, the type of help that they need, is not available.
Exactly.
And is this a popular idea, this African-centered philosophy?
It's popular among black folks.
Popular among black folks.
I would argue that in Western psychology is not that popular because they see it as competing with Western psychology.
Which could explain why there are so many that are going untreated.
Exactly.
Wow. Exactly. So as we're winding out, I want to ask you about ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a diagnosable mental illness?
It is, but when you look at it in the context in which it currently is being diagnosing, then that's where it becomes problematic. There are some people who genuinely, because how their brain is wired, have difficulty sitting down for long periods of time, concentrating on things for long periods of time. But that's a small portion of the population. What we're finding now is that ADHD is being used as a panacea for any problem that we see. So if a child is acting up in school, give him a diagnosis of ADHD, put him on stimulants, and he'll be so drugged out he won't be a problem anymore in school.
So we see a lot of our young black children, specifically young black boys, kind of being shuffled then.
Exactly.
Do you think that's harmful in the long run?
Definitely. Even their research says that it's harmful.
Even their research says
because they say that if you are diagnosed and given a stimulant at a young age, you're more likely to be susceptible to drug abuse at a later stage in your life. And so we know usually that is not a good outcome, and that would be the last resort in terms of assigning stimulants to persons who've been diagnosed with ADHD. We believe that a lot of our children who are diagnosed with ADHD is more of a problem of the classroom than it is with the child.
Exactly.
And so what we try to do in the schools that we're in, we try to intervene with the classroom to decrease the likelihood that the child is suspended, which we also know leads to the prison pipeline as opposed to higher education.
I heard somebody use the analogy for ADHD is ain't no darn daddy at home.
Right.
That's all they need. It's just some bad say.
It's a little discipline, right?
Right. Just need to sit down. Somebody tell you to sit down.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that we've discussed, and we've gotten a lot out, again, in your professional opinion, what do you think or what could you see should be done going forward to keep us on the up and up, to keep people getting what they need to see better numbers?
Well, I think the problem is twofold. One is we need to do a better job at the graduate level of training folk how to work with African Americans.
Yes.
That is a big issue.
Yeah.
So people come out of graduate school, and I teach in a graduate school, so I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They come out of graduate school not being trained on particular ways of how to help black folks. So then
Right.
they get in positions and they perpetuate Western psychology, which we know do harm to black folks. So that's one of the problems. The second problem is we need to be more assertive in our community.
Yeah.
And when I say we, I'm talking about the black church, I'm
Yes.
talking about black civic organizations,
Yeah.
I'm talking about black politicians, I'm talking about everyone who's had an opportunity to affect the black community. We need to be more assertive about how we'll go about helping the black community. If we just take what they give us, then it leads to more problems because instead of them giving it to us, we are giving it to ourselves.
Right.
And what I believe, instead of doing that, we need to be more independent and do what's best for our community and develop independent ways, independent organization, and independent thought along helping black folk.
So it sounds like what we need is a new curriculum in the schools.
Correct.
Self-knowledge.
Correct.
We need to grab ourselves by our own bootstraps.
Well, I don't think we need to develop ourselves by our bootstraps because some of us don't have bootstraps. I think those of us who have been blessed
Yes.
to overcome some things,
Should reach down.
we should do more.
Gotcha. Okay. Dr. Queener, thank
Thank
you very
you.
much. Thank you very much.